Today on the Bourbon Bites podcast, Sazerac announces a new foolproof release. Buffalo Trace is getting into the holiday spirit with some exclusive experiences at their distillery. And I answer the often asked question, is the bourbon boom over? Then stick around because I have a bite-sized review of Ben Holladay Bottled-In-Bond Bourbon. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Bourbon Bites podcast. I'm your host, Clifton, and this is the week of Thursday, November 20th, 2025. 1 week before Thanksgiving. I'll probably put out an episode on Thanksgiving just because I can record it in advance. Not sure what that theme will be, probably something turkey. It's hard not to do wild turkey around Thanksgiving, but maybe I'll find something a little bit special that I haven't done before next week, so... Not sure about that yet, but this week we do have some new bourbon and whiskey news to share with you, as well as a review of a whiskey that I've never yet had on the channel or the podcast. But before that, let's get into some news and a question that came in from the Bourbon Bites Discord community. We'll start with the news as always. I think the most exciting thing that hit my inbox this week was the release of the new foolproof Sazerac Rye Whiskey. This is coming to us from Buffalo Trace. I've long been a fan of Sazerac Rye. They've been doing barrel picks of it more recently, but now I'm seeing they have a foolproof release of it, which is funny because earlier this year they bumped up the 90 proof version to 100 proof, and now they're having a foolproof version. So they are continuing to build out this Sazerac Rye lineup. I was a bit confused when I saw them go from the 90 to 100. I think I did a podcast episode about that. But going to foolproof just makes sense to me. I think having a high proof rye whiskey option is something that was kind of lacking in the Buffalo Trace lineup. I mean, we see a lot of that with their antique collection, but in terms of their regular releases, we really don't see a foolproof option when it comes to rye whiskey. I mean, for bourbon, at least we have Benchmark Foolproof, and then of course Stag if you can find it, but there really wasn't a rye version as far as I'm aware, unless I'm completely forgetting something. The only thing I can think of course, was the E.H. Taylor Barrel Proof Rye, but I don't think that was meant to be a normal addition to the lineup. I think that's going to be a very hard to find limited edition release. So this feels like hopefully a solve for that. They say that this release was born from their $1.2 billion expansion. I don't think I've particularly talked about that on the podcast. I think that news broke before I was doing season 2 of the podcast. But Buffalo Trace did a massive expansion over the past couple of years. And that's kind of going to come up later in this podcast when I answer the viewer question that came in. But I will say they're attributing this release to that. They say that this foolproof delivers floral notes of vanilla and clove, hints of orange, and a lingering peppery finish. But I think the best part of this release is the suggested retail on it is only $39.99, and it's going to be available starting this month in select markets. I'm really hoping this one has a widespread release. I will say I haven't seen any of the 100 proof Sazerac Ryes here in Southern California yet. So they do take a while to get out here. Unfortunately, that's one of the downsides of living on the opposite coast of where bourbon is made. I do get great prices on it, but it takes a long time for new releases to show up. I'm looking forward to doing a review or a live stream actually, where I do the Sazerac 90, 100 proof, maybe a store pick, and this new foolproof version. So make sure to subscribe on YouTube for that. It'll come eventually. I just got to get my hands on those bottles. There is one additional piece of news coming to us from Buffalo Trace. They are starting their 27th annual Holidays at the Trace celebration. This is going to go on from December 4th through December 31st, and they say that guests can enjoy festive holiday lights and decor, shop for brand new retail holiday offerings, and experience the excitement of the distillery's signature events, Spirited Nights. So Spirited Nights is actually broken into 2 unique experiences, one of which is the Light Trail Experience, which is a complimentary 12-night family-friendly event inviting guests to explore the Buffalo Trace Distillery after hours. Visitors will stroll through thousands of twinkling lights, including a 60-foot-long light tunnel and dozens of themed light scenes. Now, they say there are going to be seasonal beverages and food on site, including the Buffalo Trace Bourbon Cream Hot Chocolate Bar. Oh, that sounds delicious. I love a bourbon hot chocolate. It's something that I didn't really think of combining until I think I went to, like, a winter event somewhere in South Carolina, and they did a hot chocolate bourbon, and I was like, "Wow." I know I think of, like, adding rum and things like that to hot chocolate, but bourbon just really, really works really well. Actually, funny enough, I went to Disneyland and California Adventure this past weekend, and I tried a bourbon blueberry apple cider, and it was fantastic. I love a hot drink, especially a hot cocktail around the holidays. Plus, this past weekend in Los Angeles, it's been wet, it's been rainy, it's been gloomy, it's been chilly. So that bourbon blueberry apple cider blew me away. It's gonna be a regular by when I'm in the park. So I'm here for dessert bourbon cocktails. Now, the second part of their Spirited Night celebration includes the Cocktail and Cheer. It's a premium upgrade that's available to the Spirited Nights Light Trail, during which guests that are 21 and up receive 3 winter cocktails featuring Buffalo Trace brands, along with take-home gifts including a Spirited Nights tote bag, a Buffalo Trace souvenir cup, and Buffalo Trace Bourbon Cream Minis. And these upgrades are available for $25 per person. I absolutely would upgrade if I was there. I would love a chance to visit this. So you guys go check it out. And while I won't be at Buffalo Trace for this event, I will be heading to Kentucky this weekend. The folks over at It's Bourbonite, Chad and Chad, as well as Sarah, who's also participating in the event, they are putting on a Friendsgiving, whiskey giving event. And I reached out kind of last minute and asked if there was any space available, and turns out there was. So I'm looking forward to joining them on those adventures. I'll be updating my Instagram story throughout the weekend. So if you're not yet following me on Instagram, it's at Bourbon Bites. Check it out. Also, make sure to follow It's Bourbon Night. Great channel. I've been following them for several years and have always been a fan of what they're doing. So shout out to them. And I'm looking forward to a great weekend. Now, a couple other new releases coming out. I see that Barrell Craft Spirits is releasing a toasted barrel version of Dovetail. Now, Dovetail is one of their premium bottlings that they do year round. It's typically finished in California Cabernet, port, and rum cask, but this time they are further refining it with 33 months of a secondary maturation in toasted American oak. They say that this helps deepen Dovetail's character, layering vanilla bean, honeycomb, and caramelized sugar over its hallmark notes of dark cherry, fig, and cocoa. I have been a fan of Dovetail in the past. It's kind of their core lineup is just really solid. I mean, I think Seagrass is my favorite, but Dovetail is a close second. And I would love a chance to try a toasted version of this. Now, regular Dovetail retails for about $80. I'm not seeing any pricing information of this. It hasn't gone on sale yet at time of recording this podcast. It looks like it goes on sale the 19th of November. So at that point, I will be traveling to Kentucky, so won't have a chance to update you there. But check out their website. They say it's available online on the 19th. At 10 a.m. Eastern time. So check it out, see if it's something that you are interested in. Hopefully it can reach, beyond just their website. I would love a chance to see it in the store. But yeah, toasted dovetail. That sounds like a delicious pour. Now, one news article caught my eye, not just because it is a 30-year-old bourbon, but it was distilled in the spring of my birth year. So I got very excited until I saw where it was being made and likely what the price will be. But check this out. This was featured on fredminnick.com. It is a Blade and Bow 30-year-old bourbon. It was laid to rest at the Stitzel Weller Distillery in the spring of '93. It is a blend of bourbon pulled from just 42 barrels and bottled at 54.5% ABV. And this project has been kind of taken on by Nicole Austin, who is Diageo's Director of American Whiskey Liquid Development and Capabilities. And she hand selected these barrels for this limited edition offering. She said that her vision for this project was to create a bourbon that captured decades of time, complexity, and nuance. Something that would stand as a milestone in Blade & Bow's portfolio. They say the expectation of a bourbon at this age is often that it will be over-oaked, harsh, or simple. But what I discovered was truly surprising. Many barrels revealed incredible depth, vanilla, and layered fruit character. That was my first thought when I saw this 30-year-old bourbon. I mean, I've heard mixed things of some of the higher-end Pappy Van Winkle releases, especially the 23-year-old, being extremely over-oaked, very lacking in complexity and flavor. But it sounds like they're pretty confident in this release, especially when they're bottling at 54.5%. They're not trying to squeeze every last drop out of that. To me, that kind of solidifies the fact that they at least have some faith in this product. Now, this is going to be a nationwide release beginning this month and at the Visitor Center at the Stitzel Weller Distillery. and they're going to be selling individual pours of it for $225 at the Garden and Gun Club. Now, before you shun that, each tasting will be presented on a custom gold tray, and it includes a premium glassware and keepsake item that come with it. Now, the bottle itself, get ready. The retail is $1,200 per 750 milliliter bottle. Of course, that just depends on the market. Of course, this is probably going to go crazy on secondary, but I think something like this is a once in a lifetime chance to try something like this. And I think, not to be biased, but because this was distilled right around when I was born, I'd probably pay up that 225 if I was at the Stitzelweller distillery. Definitely not something I would normally buy for myself, but just because of the significance of this pour and when it was made, I would probably, at least I would save it for a birthday. How about that? All right. Well, before we get into our bite-sized review of this episode, I did ask on our Discord community for any questions from the community about anything. I always like to get viewer feedback and thoughts with these episodes. Of course, I also have a hotline. You guys can reach out to me and leave a voicemail or text if you ever have a question to submit. You can reach me at 916-642-9837 or 916-64-BITES. But this question actually came from two different people, and they posted it almost exactly at the same time. So Brandon, who has been on my channel several times for live streams, and Zophar, or Alfonso, if you may know him personally, asked a great question that I haven't discussed on this podcast ever. And I don't know if it's because I just didn't want to get into it, or if I just feel like maybe I didn't have a valid opinion on it, but since people are asking, I'm going to answer this truthfully. The question is, if you saw the title of this podcast, I probably put it in there, but no guarantees. Is the bourbon boom over? And this is a topic that's been discussed widely. If you're not familiar, the bourbon boom is what we've been calling this modern era of whiskey resurgence, where it's become so popular, so trendy, everyone's seeking out all the allocated bottles, prices are going up, available whiskey's going down, but the fans of bourbon have been growing stronger and stronger year over year. Until these past couple years. So last year and this year, the number of bourbon buyers in the US has actually shrunk. And this hasn't happened since 2002. It's always increased. And I think this is due to a lot of factors. I think with the pandemic, a lot of people were drinking more at home versus going out to bars. And I was one of those people. I mean, I started my channel quite a while ago, but with the Bourbon Bites brand, I started that in 2019. So basically, at the year before the pandemic's when I started, and I really the channel kind of blew up during the pandemic. So I was definitely one of those people that was spending way more than usual. I was seeking out the allocated bottles. I was entering lotteries, trying to get my hands on the best of the best. But as time went on, things have changed. And, for the first time ever, younger people aren't drinking as much. They're turning to alternative substances that are legal in my state, but may not be legal in your state. I just see a lot more of that than drinking socially in younger age groups. And I think another reason that people are saying that the bourbon boom is over is we saw a lot of distilleries, including Buffalo Trace, which I talked a little bit earlier in the podcast, doing these massive, massive expansions. Apparently, Buffalo Trace makes 3 times more whiskey than they sell at this point in time, which, is great for those of us that are fans of Buffalo Trace, but it does kind of make you wonder what they're anticipating the future to be, especially with this noticeable decline in, bourbon sales. So I'm not going to go over all the facts and everything. I think that's kind of been well discussed on other channels, but I will give my opinion on this. Is the bourbon boom over? And my answer is pretty straightforward. Yes, I think the bourbon boom is over. I think we've been building to that point for a while. So let me explain. Not just the pandemic, but just, all these craft distilleries coming out, people seeking out allocated bottles. I hear stories of people who were able to buy bottles of Pappy Van Winkle on the shelves of their local liquor store for under $100. Now, that was probably, way before my time, definitely, maybe even before I was born. I don't know. But those days are long gone. So I think from that point to where we were 2 or 3 years ago, it was increasing and increasing, and I don't think anyone thought it was ever going to stop. But it's really unfortunate because I think a lot of these brands really thought this was going to keep going, so they invested heavily in new rick houses, new distilleries altogether. I think, with the total number of customers going down, I think we're going to see a surplus of bourbon that not necessarily is a bad thing. So that was kind of going to be, it was going to be a caveat to my point, but it still stands to my point that yes, I do think the bourbon boom is over. But do I think this is totally a bad thing? No. And I'm just saying that as a consumer. Look, I get this is a business, people are out to make money, but as a consumer, I think the bourbon boom being over means that I actually have a chance at getting some dang good bourbon when it's more available and available for a lower price. So here's where I foresee the bourbon industry going in the next 5 years or so. And again, I'm not a professional in the industry. I'm just a reviewer. I'm a consumer just like you. But I do think that we're going to start seeing less limited releases from these major distilleries and more just general availability of their products. I mean, even with things like Buffalo Trace releasing the foolproof Sazerac Rye at only $40, I think that's a sign that they're going to want to put out more products for the general consumer and maybe less products for the hyper enthusiast like some of us that, seek out all the antique collection and things like that. I hope ultimately the goal would be to increase the allocation of things like the antique collection or the Pappy Van Winkle line. I would love for, even a twice amount of chance to getting the bottle versus what it is now. I think that would be a huge win for us enthusiasts. But I think we're a bit away from that. I think Buffalo Trace is still going to hold on to that and make it really limited and really allocated. And I'm not just limiting this to Buffalo Trace. I'm only mentioning them because they were the one that came up during this podcast. I do unfortunately feel like some smaller brands may not make it through this bubble bursting. I think a lot of people were opening distilleries and expanding their operations, really tapping into that craft bourbon market. Honestly, I hate to say this, but I could see a lot of those not making it through unless they've used this time wisely and have developed such an incredible fan base already. I don't really see anything beyond just local consumers going out and seeking new craft brands unless they're bringing something completely innovative that's never been done before, which is really hard to find these days, honestly. And I think we're also starting to see a side effect of this by seeing more age-stated, older products being put out in the market. I mean, Knob Creek just released their 21-year-old bourbon. Of course, their 12-year-old, which was one of my absolute favorites, is readily available on the shelves. And just, 4 years ago, finding a 12-year-old bourbon was relatively hard. I mean, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof was sort of available, but, it just depended, where you got it. But having a regularly available 12-year-old bourbon on the shelf is a big win for those of us that do prefer an older aged bourbon. And I think we're going to see more of that. I think distilleries are going to realize they don't need to put out, just things as soon as they turn, legally bottle and bond or legally bourbon in general. They're not going to rush to put them out. They're going to actually let these barrels develop to be, unique products and products worth buying. At least that's my hope. I hope that they're not going to just try to release this stuff as easily as possible, as cheap as possible. I want them to actually refine and really extend the aging on some of these bottles because I know there's a lot of bourbons out there that are good at 4, 5, 6 years old, but would probably be incredible at 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. So I'm hoping that more time is spent aging in the barrels now that we have so much stock available. They can pull what they need to for their cheap offerings, but keep some barrels aging. And not saying that these necessarily even need to be limited edition releases. Why can't we have a 15-year-old standard on the shelf, Knob Creek? I think I'd like to see more older age statements across the board. And I think that's going to be possible now that the bourbon boom or the bourbon bubble has busted. So ultimately, I think it's going to benefit the consumer. It is going to hurt the industry. I hate to see, I hear stories all the time about layoffs across the bourbon industry, and I hate that people are being affected by that. But I think that's just the economy in general right now. I mean, as I mentioned last podcast, I was laid off from my job, just a couple weeks ago. So layoffs are happening across the entire job world, at least here in America. So I unfortunately see a lot of bad before the good shows up. But I think that the bourbon boom being over doesn't mean that I'm giving up on bourbon. I think bourbon's only going to get better, more available, and hopefully older along the way. So I have a hopeful outlook on it, but I do want to know what you guys think. Listen, I know everyone has a different opinion on this, and I love the conversation. So if you want to chime in on this, either leave a comment on this podcast episode on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, or visit our Discord community. I love to have a conversation about this amongst whiskey loving friends. I think we all have a different viewpoint and perspective on it, and it's what inspires me to dive deeper into these conversations is getting feedback, getting what you guys want to hear, what topics you want to really dive into. So thank you both Brandon and Zopher for that question. I love it. Hopefully that at least gives you a little insight into my thoughts on the bourbon industry as a whole. I'm just giving my impression as a whiskey reviewer, but in general, a bourbon consumer just like you. So with that, let's go and get into our bite-sized review. All right, Well, like I said earlier, this bourbon is one that I've seen for a long time and for some reason haven't really picked it up. But when I saw it on sale from K&L Wine and Spirits, I had to give it a shot because for the price, I couldn't pass it up. So this is Ben Holladay 6-year-old bottled in bond bourbon. Normally retail on this is around $55, but K&L had it on sale for only $41. So I thought $41 for a bottled in bond 6-year bourbon is pretty incredible. So I finally picked it up and decided to review it for you guys. And in doing so, I have learned to respect the hell out of this brand. So just a quick look at their website. They give you so much information. Listen, I'm a bourbon connoisseur. I love information. The more transparent you can be, the more I appreciate you as a brand. And what they're doing at Ben Holladay or holladaybourbon.com, which is their website, they are just giving you everything, like more than the normal consumer would ever want. But for those of us that are enthusiasts, we are getting all the facts. So I'm going to share some of these with you guys today. Like I said, it's a 6-year-old bottled in bond bourbon. So of course it's bottled at 100 proof. Mash bill is 73% corn, 15% rye, and 12% malted barley. And this is actually a brand based out of Missouri. I don't think I've had a bourbon out of Missouri or even a whiskey out of Missouri to this point. But they are using locally grown grain in this release. And they've been basically making whiskey since 1856. Now, of course, the distillery's gone through several owners and different closures and things like that. They most recently started distilling their own product in 2015. And their whiskey's finally coming of age, and they're finally starting to roll it out. So I'm very, very excited to try this. This is the July 2024 release. So I went to their website to see what this one is all about. And trust me, they tell you everything. So not only do you know that this barrel selection was from Rickhouse C and floors 4 and 5, but you can see things like the number of barrels, the distill date, which is spring 2017, the Rickhouse proof, which was 123.3 proof, and some notes from the distillers themselves. Now, I mentioned the Rickhouse proof because it's interesting to see the proof that these came out of the barrel at. And it sounds like at the distillery, they had a release of this at cask strength. So that can't officially be called a bottled in bond. Of course, bottled in bond has to be 100 proof. But they say that they were really proud of this, especially the Rickhouse proof version. They say all the barrels were on the old side of 6 years, and with the high floors, it came together nicely. They go on to say that if someone has not yet tried Ben Holladay before, these two bottlings, meaning the Rickhouse proof version and the bottle and bond proof, really reflect in my mind what the core of that mash bill will taste like. So these notes are coming to us from Kyle Merklane, who is their master distiller over at Holladay Bourbon. And it's nice to see that my first time trying it is what they say is the core of what their flavor profile should taste like. So I think I picked a good one to start with. It is crafted using Missouri-grown corn, aged in level 3 charred Missouri white oak, and released non-chill filtered and full flavor in every sip. So I'll stop nerding out about these facts and I'll get into the whiskey itself. Let's go ahead and give this Ben Holladay 6-year bottle and bond bourbon a nose. Oh, interesting. That's a nose that I don't think I've gotten on a recently released whiskey in a long time. It almost has a character of it that I've experienced with some older vintage pours. I mean, it kind of on the nose reminds me of some 70s or 80s wild turkey products. It has a bit of a metallic minerality to it that I've associated with those older vintage releases. I'm not sure what's causing that, but that really entices me. As someone is a fan of vintage bourbon, this stands out as a great nose. It's a bit dusty, but in all the best ways. It kind of reminds me of like an old library or an old bookstore. Just really that kind of vintage quality to it, which I'm assuming is coming from the mash bill and the oak that they used. Again, it's all local. So that kind of explains why it's a bit different than what I'm used to. Once you get beyond that, you get a bit of sweetness, a little bit of a younger oak note there as well, but it's really complementary to the darker, richer vintage notes of this on the nose. There's just a hint of what I sometimes call a craft whiskey note that I get from some smaller distilleries, usually with their younger products, but it's really very hard to detect. I mean, I think that's going to be the only thing that's going to make me think that this isn't a traditional bourbon. It has a hint of that grain quality that you don't really see on a lot of Kentucky bourbons. But again, that's not knocking it in any way, shape, or form. That's just kind of a note that I have noticed that I get on a lot of these distilleries outside of Kentucky and Tennessee and Indiana. All right. I've smelled this enough. I'm very, very excited. Let's go ahead and give it a taste. Cheers. Hmm. Oh, yeah. That's nice. Wow. Lots of sweeter flavor profiles up front. It's kind of funny because the notes that I thought were a little more muted on the nose are coming more across on the palate. So it's like that sweeter, younger oak kind of note there as well. But overall, it feels well rounded and feels nicely balanced. And I think that's coming from the age. This is a 6-year-old product, which we don't see very often coming from new young distilleries. So that's really exciting to see. And it's like they waited till the perfect time to bottle this based on flavor rather than just hitting that 4-year minimum age statement for Bottle and Bond. They really took their time on this one, and it shows. Now, this doesn't necessarily taste like an older bourbon than 6 years old. The oak kind of expresses itself in a bit of a different way. It's almost like a toasted barrel. It's like it's kind of covering up for some of the fact that this whiskey has a bit of a youthful note to it, but you're getting some of that vanilla sweetness that you would get on something that I would consider from a toasted barrel. So I can't wait to see what this mash bill will do at some higher age statements, because I think what's going on here is a beautiful bouquet of flavors. You're getting a lot of sweetness, like a bit of a caramel dessert. You're getting some floral elements there too. The dusty elements are a little bit lost on the palate. It's more so on the nose, but there's a bit of fruitiness. There's a bit of just everything I'm looking for in a good bourbon whiskey is here. I just feel like there's just something that makes this feel a bit youthful. It could actually just have something to do with the Missouri climate in terms of aging compared to things like Texas or Tennessee or Kentucky. The climate really affects how whiskey interacts with the barrel. So even though we're talking about the higher floors, the fourth and fifth floor of the rick house, it doesn't mean that that heat is interacting the same way as it would as in a state like Texas where it's extremely, extremely hot. So I'm almost wondering if Missouri just may not be the standard ideal location for aging bourbon. I think the oak is just having less of an influence on this bourbon than it would in some other states, which is making it seem a bit young. But I don't think that necessarily holds it back at all. Honestly, this is just one of those whiskeys that I find it hard to pull out specific tasting notes because it is so well rounded and balanced. Finish wise, I'll say about medium. I think the only thing that really lingers is a bit of like that sweet caramel cream kind of note and the oak. They kind of linger on the back of the palate. Nothing too crazy, doesn't feel like super long, which is kind of why I wish I had a chance to try the Rickhouse proof version. I would love to try this at cask strength, but we're limited to 100 proof with the Bottle and Bond offering. So I think maybe that's holding the finish back just a little bit. So what is my score for Ben Holladay 6-year Bottle and Bond? This is a little tough because there are other products in this price range and in this age that I can compare this directly to. I mean, I'm thinking first and foremost of the Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond 7-year bourbon. Of course, the traditional Kentucky bourbon, aged for one additional year, but bottled at the same proof and same standards that this one follows. Unfortunately, I don't have the 7-year in front of me, but I did recently finish a bottle of it, so I still am vaguely familiar with the flavor profile. I think this holds its own. I think it's unique. I think it brings something that we don't see from a lot of craft distilleries. So my score for this Ben Holladay 6-year Bottle and Bond bourbon is actually a 7.5 out of 10. I think this whiskey is great for what it is. I think that they are on the right track. This mash bill is so delicious. And the fact that the master distiller even says that he thinks that this is what the core flavor profile should be for Ben Holladay makes me really excited for the future. I would love to see more age on this whiskey. I think if you age this like 3, 4, 5 more years, this could be a contender to beat out some of my favorite Kentucky bourbon. I think it's worth your money for sure, especially if you want to try a Bottle and Bond bourbon outside of where we normally see it. We see it a lot in Kentucky and Tennessee and Indiana. So it's so fun to see that coming out of another state. I think it is a massive achievement, and I can't wait to see what Ben Holladay does next. So that's my thoughts on this bottle. If you guys have had a chance to try this or any of their other releases, let me know how they are. Thank you all so much for listening. This has been the Bourbon Bites podcast, a whiskey podcast with a gaming twist. Cheers, and I will talk to you guys next episode.